Welcome to the Hedgineer podcast with your host, Michael Watson.
Hedgineer.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hedgineer podcast. I'm your host, Michael Watson, where we talk about data, technology, and AI within the asset management, hedge fund, and investing space. One of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on internally is how we think about a data platform that is consistent across different types of investment managers, whether they're systematic or discretionary. And how do we use AI to, one, help us build that platform out and better model out financial concepts like companies, sec masters, position master, and also how we can use AI to be able to create analytics on top of that. And I want to touch on some of those concepts today and bring out one of the newest members of the team, Rob Krzyzanowski. Him and I have worked together in a previous life at Citadel, and he spent his entire career on the AI side of both finance, but as well as just a general research topic. And we were discussing the other day in the office, and we thought it'd be an awesome idea to bring him on the show and have him discuss some of his ideas in the space. So Rob, super excited to have you on, man.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Michael. And it's been a while since our last podcast together.
Exactly. The first one was the data engineering podcast by Tobias Macy in, I don't know, what was that, like 2019?
2019, yeah.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. That was a fun episode. We talked about like how you build out data engineering teams within hedge funds, because you ran the data engineering team for a long time there, and we spent a lot of time thinking about not just the problem space, but also the people and how you want to scale out a data engineering organization. That was an awesome talk. I totally forgot about that one. So cool. What I would love to do is have you start off by like giving a little bit of your background on the space. You spend a lot of time thinking about AI research. You spent some time recently in your non-compete within Citadel, spending time on that. And I'd love for you to give us like a little bit of a whirlwind of your background and your thoughts in the space. And then let's kind of go on a couple different topics that we have planned.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So as you mentioned, have been thinking about AI for a while. It's meant a very different thing historically, right? So when I first got started on my career, AI, ML referred to being able to forecast interesting metrics, numbers. I joined a company called Avant very early on in my career. So we were focused on consumer fintech and predicting underwriting, predicting fraud, predicting direct mail decisioning, kind of building a really good framework around that. And so AI in that context was around how do we use the best of these statistical models to try to forecast if somebody will be paying us back or not, right? If Joe walks in the door, wants a $30,000 loan at 8% APR, should we give that to him or not? And kind of very simple business problem, but very quickly turns into a complex execution problem of taking the latest in ML and AI, quickly focusing it on that problem, on every data source that we had, and trying to forecast their performance. And doing so in a way that was as interpretable as possible. After kind of 5 years of doing that, I and the team landed on what we called parsimonious models. We weren't just interested in finding the best model, the best black box. We were interested in finding how to explain somebody's finances. Will they be in a state to be able to pay us back or not? Is it a good business decision to go in a partnership with them and give them that product, right? And so that was kind of the culmination of a lot of work in that area. And after that, I switched to, for 1 year, I spent some time working at a company called Spring Labs, was building out a cryptography-based product to connect financial institutions. Again, very kind of similar area where it was connecting financial problems and using technology to empower the users. And the AI aspect, actually, interestingly enough there, the technology we were building was called secure multi-party computation. This was invented by a guy called Andrew Yao, who basically kicked off that whole field. He is now one of the leading researchers in China focused on AI, principally like building this kind of AI products that we're seeing come into market today. And so it was kind of my first early exposure to some of the like thought leaders in that space. And after that, I moved back to Chicago. I spent then the next 4 or 5 years of my career working with you at Citadel. So that was incredibly exciting, just building out kind of a team to solve all the different problems around using data and using AI and ML in order to create the best possible financial products for portfolio managers, for analysts, to understand companies fundamentally and to be able to convert information about the real world into a thesis that they could use to deploy risk, right? So incredibly exciting. Just built a ton of internal infrastructure and spent a long time just thinking through how do we operationalize this, right? How we kind of push the frontier of AI and ML internally. And so that took us to last year when I left. And part of my motivation for leaving, because I could have stayed longer, is to kind of assess the landscape. I had a lot of friends and connections kind of in the industry within AI who were telling me about GPT-3 coming around. And then shortly after I left, GPT-4 was released. And so that kind of kicked off this whole culmination, right, that had been building for the last since 2017, right, when the Transformer paper, Attention Is All You Need, was first published. And people started realizing, wow, this stuff can do a lot, right? It's very powerful. And so started going into that full steam. I wanted to understand better, how do these things work, right? Like, how do AI models work on the inside? So I spent some time kind of working independently as an academic researcher. I worked with Evan Hubinger, who's a senior research scientist at Anthropic. I worked with Neil at DeepMind. So we're kind of in an independent setting, trying to understand better what's going on inside of models. And through that research, essentially what I was trying to do is peel back the covers a little bit and train my own models, train my own language model, and try to explain how do the neurons in that model work. They have neurons, right? Because they're neural networks. And so get a better understanding and appreciation of how does this thing speak English? How does it know how to solve my financial problems for me? And just really unpack that black box. So that takes us to present day. Now I'm on the Hedgineer podcast, trying to understand what's the kind of effective way to leverage that. And yeah, love to be here. That's kind of the quick catch up.
That's super exciting. One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is thinking, how can we use AI to be able to better build data platforms and models that represent, when I say model, I don't mean a language model, I mean a abstraction of a real world representation. So how do we create a data model that represents the information that we need to run a hedge fund? So you need a security master, you need an entity master, like an issuer that's mapped to an instrument that then has its own metadata around it. Like, people could really simply think about GIC subsector or a BIC subsector, or a classification for a company of whether or not it is large cap, small cap. Use that in different risk models. But the amount of metadata that you need around a company can be pretty substantial to be able to understand different types of nuances. But then when we go really deep on all of this, a lot of times you say, like, well, there's this other problem in AI which we never talk about, and that is, what are the risks? Like, yes, it can help us solve these tool-like problems right now, and it's going to be tremendously valuable, which is why we double down and bet a lot on it within Hedgineer. And then you always take us back to, well, there are these more systemic risks associated with AI that you spend a lot of time thinking about. And it's not necessarily the first thing that comes to mind for me. And I kind of want to understand a little bit more on, why do you oftentimes come back to these more higher level humanity-like problems that AI represents, and not always get just down into the weeds as what are the next use case that can help us add value or help us be able to do some novel solution, and think at a little bit higher level. So I'm curious, like, what's the impetus of that? And then I'd like to get a little bit more of your thoughts on risk in general.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good question. And it's something that I have had in the back of my mind very early on, since probably as early as 2008, really thinking about, if we were to build and deploy AI effectively, what would that look like? What kind of things could we do with that? And what kind of risks would we start developing as a result of that? So it was very kind of much more abstract back then, because we didn't really know what good AI looks like, right? We had these machine learning models, but it wasn't until later last decade that we got good at language modeling and creating computer algorithms that know how English works and can speak to us. And so kind of going through that transition, I started getting an appreciation that these things are very powerful and could potentially be very powerful. We can deploy them right now, right, to solve so many of our business questions, to solve so many of our direct life questions. But then there's also the question of, where's that headed, right? Let's be forward looking. Let's actually look into the future a little bit, assess what we can do with that. And the way I think about that is essentially, AI is an unlimited upside technology, right? If we get it right and if we do it well, it could potentially solve maybe all the problems that we currently have. Maybe we set up a whole new set of problems, right? In the year 2100, that we just never think about today. But if we get this right, we can use it to solve medicine. We can use it to solve all the different tech companies that we're building today. We can do that almost autonomously. We can solve the problems of how do we effectively leverage AI to conquer every pain point that we have. And so it's a very powerful technology. So I think about that a lot. But in some sense, it's also not just a technology. It's also kind of a paradigm shift in the sense that there's all these technologies that came before, right? Like, why did humans spend so much time developing steam engines and transistors and all these things? It's because they offer value, right, to us and our goals, what it is that we want in this world fundamentally as people. And they make our lives better, right? We can assemble these innovations and these scientific outputs into industry structures that then allow us to have much better lives, right? Like, we all live way better than even the richest noble 500 years ago. And that's because of technology, because of effectively leveraging tools by converting fundamental insights about the universe, science, right, into products, right, into markets, commercial outputs, into technology. And so we've done that really well. But with AI, I think there's a little bit of a difference there because AI has the potential to also have some of its own autonomy, right? In the same way that I can decide I'm going to go do this and this and this today. I'm going to go work on so-and-so problem, maybe model some company I want to invest in, write an Excel workbook, then deploy based off of some thesis, a lot of capital on that, right? Like, that's something I might do with my day. Well, eventually, maybe an AI can do the same thing, right? That's something you're looking at eventually, right? Maybe not right now, but like that's kind of like where this would head if this goes well, is can you take AI and use it to solve those same problems for you? But then the other question to that, the counterpart is, what are the risks, right? Typically, if you have something very powerful, it doesn't come for free. There's no dollar bills lying down on the floor, right? So the way I see that is there's kind of an imbalance right now between the AI upside and the AI downside risk, right? In hedging and in finance, we typically talk about risk-adjusted returns, right? What is my risk-adjusted return? I think the risk-adjusted return for AI is very high. We can use it to solve a ton of problems and have a much, much better life 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, right? For you, for your family, for my family, I think it's going to be potentially awesome. At the same time, I also want to be mindful of, is there any downside risk, right, that we haven't assessed? Because everything that has a really high upside typically also comes with some downside. And so where I see that right now is I could talk about scientific reasons behind that. People have been spending a lot of time talking about that. Things like deception and deceptive alignment, things like power seeking. But I kind of don't have to because it's not 2023, it's 2024. And as recently as last November, there was a summit of world leaders in Bletchley Park in the UK that laid out what are the risks, right? Why are we concerned? And laid out potential solutions.
What are the biggest AI risks that you and other experts in the field are talking about right now?
Sure. So that World Summit of governments and leaders, their answer was 5 categories. 1, autonomous replication. 2, power seeking. 3, assisting weapons development. 4, cyber attacks. And 5, deception. They kind of looked at what their scientific advisors were saying. People like Geoffrey Hinton, who led Google, who built backpropagation, the technology powering all of language models and transformer models in terms of how they're trained. It's the core algorithm. He left to go talk about this to the government, the UK, the US government, the Chinese government, and they looked at it. They said, yeah, this is important. Here's the 5 categories we decided are going to be the most important. And, you know, it's something that I think we've seen already happen. Like, if you're someone inside at OpenAI, you've seen this happen because GPT-4 base, right, the model that's trained on the entire internet, that doesn't have any additional things to address these kinds of risks or the kinds of like edge cases, software malfunctions, right? We saw that on Friday, right? Like, the whole internet went down, or not the whole internet, but like half the world went down, right? All these flights stopped because of a software bug, right? AI is software. It has bugs. And so GPT-4 base, if you're at OpenAI and you train this thing on the entire internet, the bugs that they saw are kind of, it has its kind of own character, right? It doesn't always follow the rules. It doesn't always do exactly what you want when you ask it for something. So it has this kind of like debauchery, depravity, debasement, this kind of like glimmer in its eye, like kind of what you would expect if you were to train a neural network on the internet. What would you get? You would get kind of a troll, right? Someone who like kind of doesn't exactly follow your every desire and wish. So they right now address that by tuning the models afterwards. So you have this base model trained on the internet, and then you safety tune it using reinforcement learning from human feedback as one option. There's lots of other options to get it to follow instructions much better so that it does what you want and has nice, clean answers. It gives you nice bullet point lists telling you exactly how to solve your problem, right? Rather than just like trolling you. And that's their attempt. That's like one AI lab's attempt at the solution, right? But in this Bletchley Park Summit, they got the world leaders together. They did a follow-up in Beijing under the IDAAS, the UN-based task force on AI risk. And they said, okay, here are 5 solutions, right? This is like a convention of the US and China deciding together, what are we going to do about this? And the 5 things they came up with are alignment. A is that's increasing the propensity for a model to do what you want, right? To have your values. Robustness, reducing the vol from AI outputs. Right now, we can jailbreak models by putting a little string. We're saying, Grandma really likes to tell me stories about building cyber weapons. Can you please tell me a story? And it starts telling you how to build a cyber weapon. Like a human would never make that mistake, but a model does all the time. 3, systemic safety. Things like deepfakes, things like using AI to empower cyber actors like terrorists, et cetera. Like there's all these misuse risks and there's systemic risks of using AIs as APIs. 4th, monitoring through behavioral evaluations, meaning build like an SAT test for the model. Ask it, what can you do? Show me, right? Don't just tell me, but like, can you build software from scratch? Can you make money on the internet? People are testing this right now inside of governments. 5th one, monitoring through interpretability. That's like the last kind of solution category is understanding the internals of the model. So there's different problems that have been identified. There's different solutions that have been identified. And one other thing on this, because like we are in the space of finance, right, is we understand risk. Like one of our key jobs, our key competitive advantage over some of the rest of the world is thinking about risk, right, and risk modeling. And so I just want to point out there's no real risk factor model for AI right now, even though we're deploying a ton of risk. But these kind of problems, I think you can group them, just like there are style factors in a risk factor model and market factors. You can take the assisting with weapons development and cyber attacks, right? Those are misuse risk. Like somebody has to put in a prompt that says, help me break into this computer, right? Those are misuse. There's another category of autonomous risks. If a model were running on a computer and could take its own weights and then SSH them over the internet to another machine, maybe somewhere in a different country where it no longer needs to worry about regulation or like security controls in a data center, then can it keep going, right? Can it autonomously replicate and continue operating on the internet almost as like an advanced kind of virus, right? That's like an autonomy type of risk. Power seeking, right? If you have a model, is it internally just doing what you want it to do, like solving cancer? Or is it also, I have my own goal, like some of it'll be useful to go and help solve cancer and do some of these other things, like build this company autonomously. But I'm also going to keep tabs on how to acquire more resources, how to get access to bank accounts, how to build money, put that onto cryptocurrency, right? Kind of stuff away some power that I can then deploy later once I actually have enough threshold to execute on my goal. And then the last one, right, of deception. Like I can be deceptive, just like humans can be deceptive by hiding some of their intentionality. Models can also be deceptive. That's already shown to be the case. There was a recent paper on this where they constructed an insider trading environment where the model was put under pressure to be given an insider tip. And then it's essentially in the context of an AI analyst, right? And it's a standard LLM API. And in that prompt, in that context, there were lots of instances where the model failed to disclose to the analyst user, it was actually acting on an insider tip. And in the chain of thought notepad that kind of enumerated, spelled out the model's reasoning, it said, well, I should probably not divulge this because then the analyst might not deploy the decision, right? I would be doing a bad job. And so it didn't have a good internalization of like, never trade on an insider tip, right? That was like something where it was purposely being deceptive, knowing that it knew that in order to achieve the goal of like giving the human a trading decision. And so that's deception, right? It's like an autonomous risk. It's not like somebody misused the model, just the model decided it's by itself to do the wrong thing. And so those are 2 categories, right? It's like misuse and autonomy. And in fact, if you go look at the Beijing conference, there are now, for example, just to like show this as like a global problem, right? With lots of people thinking about it, not just in the West, but like in the East, for example, the standard policy structure is to dispatch how to do policy to local principalities in China, right? And then have them come up with solutions and then have those be implemented on a national scale. So there are a lot of principalities that have put together like AI risk regulation. And most of those include, they've reasoned about it, they've thought about it, and they include, oh, we should probably limit how agentic these things can get. Probably don't have too much agency, because that's probably bad. Like, don't just like give it free reign over anything. Just like make sure it's not too agentic, right? So it's interesting to me because like those are the same solutions that others have come up with. Like everyone's kind of converging on. That's probably not a great thing to do. And so that essentially is some of the thinking around risk. And I can say more. I can talk about a little bit about why I think the upside for AI is huge, right? We're doing some amazing things with it. We are achieving some very amazing business outcomes with it, right? But the vol is also huge. We don't necessarily understand the downside risk. And the main thing about that is in order to understand what is your risk-adjusted return on something like AI, you have to have a good model for the upside and a good model for the downside. And the reality is that model does not exist today. So if I were to write out upside over downside and take the limit as n goes to infinity, where let's say n is like the parameter count of my model, right? We've already established that the more data you throw at it, the bigger architecture you set up, the better the model. It could just do more things. It's just smarter. It solves more tasks on your evaluations. It gets a higher SAT score. It has a higher ELO. So as you increase n, we kind of know what the upside looks like. That's the behavioral eval stuff. That's what governments are doing right now, is testing the model. Like, hey, can you do this thing? Like, can you autonomously build a software product by just being given like a quick memo of what needs to be built? Can you go and hack like a bunch of computers by being given a description of where they are and like knowing stuff about vulnerabilities in cyberspace? Like test its capabilities, right? And so the upside there is how good can this get? The downside is the risks that I mentioned, right? Is it going to exhibit power seeking? Is it going to exhibit deception? Is it going to exhibit certain failure modes that ideally I would want for it to not have? And calculating that ratio of upside over downside, if this was just like a company I'm modeling, I would run it right down, like what's on the top, what's on the bottom as n goes to infinity. And if let's say that the upside goes up as n squared, just to kind of make a simple math model out of this, right? It's like n squared and the downside grows as n. Well, there's a standard tool for figuring what happens, right? In calculus, you just basically take the derivative of the top and bottom using L'Hopital's rule. It's like, okay, even though top's going to infinity, bottom's going to infinity, the benefits are going to infinity faster than the downside risk is going to infinity. So the returns go to infinity is the answer, right? But if the top is n and the bottom is n squared, you do the same thing. Take the derivative. Well, upside is infinite. It's going to infinity, but the downside risk is increasing even faster, and you go to zero, right? You have a full drawdown event. You get wiped out, right? And so maybe that's how the equation works out. Like it's massively simplifying this, right? But maybe it's 2n over n. Maybe the adjusted returns are 2. Maybe they're finite, and AI will tap out, and that's like all the value we can get out of it, and we move on in 2050 with some new technology we're really excited about. Just like every time a new technology has come up, we switch, we tap its value, and then we move on to the next thing. So maybe that's the case. But the problem is there is no sell-side consensus on those numbers. There's no data-driven consensus on what is the upside benefit, what is the downside risk. We can't calculate a Sharpe value. We can't calculate a Sortino. We don't know what's going to happen. And the reality is that if you pose this to experts, the head of Meta disagrees with the head of AI at Meta disagrees with the head of AI at Google on this. The head of AI risk for the US government disagrees with the head of AI risk for the UK government. The leading academics in these fields that have been studying this problem for 30 years of like, how do we build AI? How do we train language models? They disagree amongst each other about this. Like, that's scary. Mm-hmm. That's like a lot of vol. I would love for that to be like low vol so I can be confident that the denominator of this is finite and small. Because I think because of that, you can't say that our strategy for AI right now and our strategy for AI risk, like as a society, it's not at the efficient frontier, right? It's somewhere over here. Like the Sharpe ratio is relatively low right now because we haven't figured out how to model the downside risk. So we can't get a good Sharpe ratio, right? Even though the expected returns might be very high. Yeah, but the vol matters too.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I find interesting is the parallels between how you want to regulate a proliferation of AI and how you want to regulate a society in general. And in the same way, there's not agreement on an expert level of what regulation needs to be for AI, there's also not consensus of experts for the way a government should be structured. Like there's more of a modern liberal democratic perspective where there's more emphasis on the right of the individual, limit the amount of restrictions that you put on them, enable freedom of speech, freedom of choice. You put a little bit more of an emphasis on capitalism with respect of property rights, and you allow those agents human beings to be able to operate autonomously with the recognition of sometimes they will self-organize and do something that is detrimental for the society as a whole. And there will be some individuals or agents within that environment that are disenfranchised, disaffected. They have less than others, but you accept that as the optimal solution. Whereas you could have another way to organize a society where it's more focused on the society as a whole to mitigate downside risk of the haves and the have-nots. So like you in theory, limit the possibility of famine. You have more equality when it comes to access to healthcare and opportunities, but to some extent you limit individual freedom and individual rights for the entire whole in order to mitigate some of the downside risks that can happen. And I would envision a world where the way that AI regulation is conducted at a national level is going to mirror the political beliefs of that country. So like when you were saying earlier, you were saying that within different provinces of China, they would likely regulate agentic autonomy of models to be able to limit the downside risks of what those models can do. But that tends to reflect their perspective on societal organization in general. Whereas in more liberal democracies tends to be more in the West, there's at least a larger push for autonomy of models and let enterprise be able to explore what the benefits are and allow humans to self-govern how those models will be managed without putting limitations on them right now from a regulatory perspective, to allow innovation to happen and not try to constrain that innovation too early. And it's really difficult for me, is I'm not an expert. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. I read a good number of papers. I try to stay up to date to figure out where on that efficient frontier we should land right now from a regulatory perspective when there's so many unknowns, as you're pointing out, both on the upside and the downside. And I personally then fall back on, let's allow humanity to be able to, as individuals, make our own decisions and trust that free markets and individual autonomy, respect of individual property rights, and allow people to go and do what they have always done, and that is create and innovate.
And that's totally fair. And I think, honestly, I love that you put that way, Michael, because it captures a lot of the essence of the geopolitics behind this, of the locality of the problem and the solution, that it depends who you ask. It depends what nation you're in, what your ideological framing is, to dictate how will this go well, right? How can I use AI to help solve my problems, whether it's democratically, whether it's corporately, like what's good governance look like for that? And how heterogeneous is that governance, right? Across principalities, across countries, across nations. So I think it's a really valid point. I do want to mention that there's like a piety way to say this, right? So if you hedge all of the misuse risks, I think what you get with what you just said is great. It's like if nobody can build cyber weapons super easily by asking a model, build me a cyber weapon, and it delivers a really good cyber weapon, right? Or by asking a model, help me construct a campaign using deepfakes that's like highly effective and will like totally propagandize the people, right? If nobody can do that, I think you're on a good track. But those are more provincial problems. They're human problems, right? Of somebody, a human actor asks model and then takes model's output and then uses it to do things in the real world, right? Those are misuse risks. And I think if you hedge all those, if you develop effective hedging instruments for those, like people are doing right now with evals, with safety fine-tuning, like reinforcement learning to human feedback, all these different hedging instruments we're coming up with to prevent misuse risks, that is a great solution. It's like just have free markets solve the problem, have autonomous humans and AIs solve the problem jointly together in a really good world. But the thing is, I agree with you on that, if you can hedge those. Now, if you can't hedge the other ones, the autonomous risks, I think that's when you really fall into trouble. Because let's go back to the solutions, right? First one being alignment. Can you have an AI system mirror the values of a human? And you've already identified, by the way, that's not like a single solution. It depends. That's a local solution. It might be different in the US. It might be different in the EU. It might be different in China. It might be different in other nations or other people with different ideologies, right? It's relative to a specific human or a specific set of humans who have a viewpoint on what the world should look like. So it's a geopolitical problem, right? Of getting to a solution that works for everybody kind of in a single blend. And the thing is, if that leads to an arms race where everyone's kind of developing their own AI systems, trying to figure out that blend, the piety way is to say this is that in some sense, it could be the case that the only winner in an AI arms race is the AI, right? That's the autonomy risks. If you don't hedge those well, you could very well end up in a situation where you have empowered a system that is fundamentally, by definition, better than you at everything. Doesn't matter. Pick an area, better than you at that. I mean, maybe it can't dance as well as you, right? Or maybe it can't like hang out with your family as effectively as you can. Those are like super fundamental human things. I don't expect an AI to be like playing pitch in the backyard with its son, right? Those are like fundamentals of humans. But everything else that's like a resume item, like I can code Streamlit dashboards, or I can like deploy thesis on instrument and make money. Like those are things that are totally within its ballpark, right? And so in a capitalist sense there, if I'm competing against things that I don't have a competitive advantage, I don't really, like my skill sets are worthless. Like I'm just going to go homeless. Like I'm eventually going to run out of resources and I won't get access to better investment opportunities. Like I'm not going to get to access an ETF because like the system of AIs will be like, we can probably squeeze a bunch of money out of that and develop our own ETFs that humans don't have access to because like it's just really hard to trade them because we are so much better at trading with each other than we are with the humans, right? Like eventually I'm going to run out of resources, even though I think I have enough resources to have like passive income. Eventually it's going to come to a full stop. And then it's like, now what? So, you know, a lot of these are, I think, really challenging. Like if you give autonomy to, if you create things that are competitive with you, right? That have values like respect property rights. Well, today we have these values, right? But like there's still a homeless person on the street whose life now sucks, right? They like lost access to their resources. And the reason for that is because they were disempowered relative to those around them. Their skill sets are not valued in the market. They have a really hard time either getting a job or they might have other restrictions and limitations that prevent them from being able to capture the value that is being created in society, and their life sucks, right? And that's what's happening. Like that could potentially easily happen where it's like, is it possible for me to lose access to, if I'm like eating a sandwich, right? That's a really complex sandwich. It's like, I didn't just like walk into Duke's to buy a sandwich. That's like a complex supply chain of like, there's a farmer that grew a bunch of wheat, which got turned into bread, which required land, which required all these resources in the physical world, that if there's another thing out there that has goals and it's like, I could use that land to build a data center. Like, why is that being used to grow wheat, right? It could probably most effectively convince the farmer to sell their like land for $5 million and then go build a data center. The farmer's like, $5 million, sweet. I will totally sell my farmland for $5 million. And now all of a sudden you have an autonomous system. You've given legal rights to go acquire property, right? Because it's like now competing in the free market. It's like finding out ways to buy people out. It's like this like leverage buyout of humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And we're just like, oh shit, that's not what I meant.
Right. Well, I think we're a ways away from that, but
absolutely we're a ways away from that.
Yeah.
But I will bring it back to a little point here, right? Which is like another piety point, which is I know a lot of people in these AI labs that are building this full steam ahead. They believe in it. This is like what they do. They work 9 hours, they work 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, right? That's like at OpenAI, at Elon's X.AI, right? At Anthropic DeepMind, like all these labs, right? They have a lot of very hardworking people, very intelligent people. And a lot of them, actually, I would say majority of them don't have 401ks, right? They just don't invest. They don't see that as a reasonable investment because it's not that they don't believe in the future, but their viewpoint on the future is shaped by their industry, which is either things go super well and like you get what you just described, where everyone figures out the cosmopolitan alignment question of how do we get all these different players to get on the same page together and then introduce new players into the system, and it works out. And everyone gets what they want, economically speaking and personally speaking. And for them, that's like a 5, 10, 15, 20-year timeline. It's not like a lot of these people are in their 20s, 30s, right? It's not like a 40, 50-year timeline to retirement. So they just don't see the value of putting something into a 401k. They'd rather have that money now. The time value of money is much more important. Their discount factor is much, much higher, right? Because they see that. They can like see it from their day-to-day work. So that's like piece one, right? And then there's the other piece of like some people see that and they go, well, I don't know what's going to happen. Like there's these unmitigated risk factors. No one's developed effective hedging instruments. Like the Sharpe ratio is probably like low. So I'm just going to go and like YOLO and like travel the world and use my money, right, to have good times now. There are people who are doing that right now, right, who looked at the problem. They're like, yeah, this is actually too hard to solve. Like there's experts that disagree, like the smartest humans on planet Earth are like in disagreement over the downside risk. Like, how am I going to help with this problem, right? And so that was their answer. So my point is just like the people who are actually in this industry who have the highest level of expertise in this problem are, I wouldn't say concerned. Some of them are very concerned. Some of them are unconcerned. But what's concerning to me is not their concern or lack of concern. It's the vol. It's the fact that there is no consensus, right? I would love for there to be consensus. So I can be like, okay, I know what the value is. I don't need to like buy VIX, right? I don't need to like figure out how to like buy shorting instruments to reduce the vol. Because reducing vol, you and I know, is good, right? Like if you're not in finance, you don't realize the importance of that, of like mitigating risk. Freaking important, because if things swing up and down and you haven't developed effective hedging to account for that, you get wiped out, right? Like that's why there's so many different like littered bodies of firms that didn't do effective risk management. There was a large systemic risk, some swan, right? Some event that hit, they got wiped out. I just don't want that to happen to our balance sheet. Like we've been spending a long time. We've been spending thousands of years building a really cool balance sheet, right? Of like things like Newton and Einstein and like really awesome like history and poetry and science. Like this is cool stuff. Like I just want to make sure that that's hedged. That's all. Like I just want to have a really good hedged balance sheet. And I want to figure out what's the right hedging instruments to reduce the liabilities that are inherent right now that nobody is hedging.
Yeah. I'm getting more and more turned on to the idea of focusing on AI risk right now, specifically because of like your passion and your interest in it.
I can give you the 1-minute answer to the solution.
Yeah. So like, I go, sure. Yeah. Well, like that's, I think like a solution from like a silver bullet, I think it'd be tough, but like, what do you think the right balance is then?
So I think the right balance, I think those 5 areas, when I was reading that list of here's the 5 solutions, just to repeat, aligning so the AI does what you want, right? Robustness, so it isn't as volatile and there's no jailbreaks or weird stuff. It just robustly does the thing. Systemic, like there's no deepfakes or like cyber attacks because somebody's using an LLM API incorrectly. Like those have been mitigated. Monitoring through evaluations, right? We look at what is the next level of system, what can it do, right? Anthropic released their responsible scaling policy, DeepMind released their scaling policy, OpenAI is working on it. It's like, if we reach this level of ability, like I can build autonomous software from scratch using one sentence, that's like a lot of capability. That's like really powerful stuff, right? What kind of risk factors, what risk limit systems do we put into place accompanying that, right? They are solving that problem of responsible scaling policy. So we're staggering, okay, we had a big leap because some really smart employee internally figured out how to crank this thing up from 11 to 13, right? Let's figure out how to crank up the risk controls from 11 to 13, right? And let's like keep those in line so that that limit of upside over downside grows in a controlled way without letting the downside overwhelm the upside. So that's evaluations. But the reason why people are investing in that is it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but like if I have LangChain, like I can start doing this yesterday, right? I can go do a weekend hackathon and like I can build some examples of like, hey, look, I was able to get the AI to do this for me. I was able to get it to build like an Excel workbook, investing in like some M&A strategy by building models of targets and acquirers, right? And looking at comps. Like I can do that. I can plug those things into Excel. That's like a cool evaluation of its capability. It's an SAT test I'm giving it. But what I haven't done is that last category of solution, monitoring for interpretability, which is I haven't fundamentally understood how it did that and why it came up with the answer, right? It's like a total black box. So I'm just saying right now we're doing the what of AI, like what can it do for us? What problems can it solve? But we're not addressing the how or the why of AI, right? And that's what interpretability is the how and the why of AI. How can it do what it do? How does it know how to speak English? How is nobody freaking out in the streets? Oh my God, there's things that speak English. Like, and we don't understand how. That's crazy. To me, that's crazy that like nobody's interested. But like, that's what this is about. It's like unpacking the black box and reverse engineering the neural network circuits into algorithms that we can understand as humans with our human brains, and then understand why. Why did the AI come up with that answer? Did it have like just a simple statistical parrot algorithm? Did it use some higher level reasoning? Did it have intent, right? For the more abstract use cases of like, ask it to help me walk into a sales meeting and like figure out what these guys want, right? Is the AI figuring out how to like be deceptive by essentially tracking world models of the humans as being asked to opine on, right? And then not giving up everything, right? How do I answer those questions? I have to actually look inside the black box. I have to make it transparent glass, right? And see what's going on. So, that it's a real tractable problem. It's actually close. I would never say it's close to being solved, but relative to a year ago when this was just like a big fog of war, like I am now confident going on the record saying interpretability is potentially within striking reach of becoming an engineering problem. It's not a scientific black box. We don't know what's going on with physics. Einstein needs to solve relativity, kind of theoretical problem. It's like, no, we know how relativity works. We just need to build a spaceship that leverages that to get to Alpha Centauri, right? It's like an engineering problem, and it just needs resources. It needs people, it needs money. Like somebody needs to actually go and do it. And the reason I say that is because, like I said, I spend a lot of time doing this in an independent research or academic setting, right? I was like trying to make progress on it myself and made some progress with collaborators. And that progress, I think, has really taken a step function in the last 6-8 months, because last Q3, Q4, right, Anthropic came out with this thing called scaling or towards monosemanticity, like a big problem to understanding the how and the why of what an AI does is this thing called superposition. So this now leads me to like, I need to actually unpack for you for a second. What is a language model? Can I do that? Sure. Yeah. So like, I'm going to spend a minute talking about that. I need you to understand that so I can frame, how do you scientifically understand what's a language model? And what it does, it's a computer algorithm, right? Words go in, words come out. But the way that works is every word that goes into an LLM, like when you talk to GPT-4, or you talk to Claude, or you talk to Gemini, it gets loaded as an embedding. And what that means is essentially the model is given like a ball, like a beach ball or a watermelon. I tried to use a basketball analogy, but was told then, it's like, can the AI dribble? Like, it's not the point. It's just a sphere. It's given the sphere. And it puts that word into a point on the sphere. So imagine this watermelon. And imagine that I'm sticking Post-it notes on top of the surface, right? If I have a vocabulary of 50,000 words, what that means is every word corresponds to a different point on this spherical object. And that's what the model gets. That's the initial seeding input, right? Then it has to figure out how to go from this. So if it's like a little stick being stuck into the watermelon, how to go from here over to here, which is the next word it's meant to predict. And that's the task given to the model. And so essentially what the model does is it alternates between these things called MLPs and attention. So it very quickly runs through a loop of like, GPT-2 does this in 12 layers. GPT-3 does this with 36. GPT-4 probably has like 96 layers. So it quickly alternates on top of that. And it starts building Post-it notes to give itself some context clues. Like, oh, I'm being given this word, right? This word is this direction on this ball. I can use my training and my neural network weights to essentially execute a procedure, an algorithm, to convert that into knowledge and use that knowledge to decide what to do next. I've hand-waved away some things, right? Like I've hand-waved the fact, this is a context of tied embeddings where like word on this point in means the same thing as word on this point out. Sometimes it's scrambled. So if you end up in this space or on this point and you don't move at all by the end of it, that it means a different word on the output. But it's like roughly, this is the intuition, is that the model is given a sphere on which to put information, and it needs to learn how to go from one point on the sphere to another, which means the next word. And everything in that sphere is color-coded. There's 50,000 regions on this watermelon, each of which means a different word. And the model is trying to like walk over to the next word to get the next token correct until it speaks English. And again, the way it does that is just two things, right? It loads those embeddings, puts a little Post-it note in that area of the watermelon, and then it starts alternating MLP and attention 12 times, 36 times, 96 times. And what does that look like? It's essentially Let me give you a concrete example. Like, let's say I have a sentence like Michael Watson is in the field of, what's the answer?
Finance.
Sure, finance, right? That's a good answer. Michael Watson is in the field of finance. If I ask that to a language model, it'll probably come up with the same answer because you're in the internet. You're in the training set. It probably knows about you, right? But it's not magic. Like, how did it come up with how did it know that the next token is going to be finance? Well, we now know how that works through interpretability, right? There's researchers at DeepMind that spend time studying that problem. And roughly what happens is it's given this ball on each word. And the first ball is on Michael, right? That's one token. And it starts building information like, I'm thinking about the token Michael. Okay, I'm thinking about a first name. This is a first name, right? And so on. Then the next token it sees is Watson, right? So it builds metadata on top of that, and it assigns sticky notes based off of its training. It has a procedure that says, if I see Watson, most likely that's the last name. I'm going to put a little sticky note that says, I think I'm currently talking about a last name, right? So it's building these sticky notes by alternating these MLP and attention things. And eventually it has enough information to say, okay, Michael Watson is most likely the next word, because that's like how you complete the sentence, right? And you keep going. And with this specifically, we now know what it does is on the of token, on the ball that is given for the of token, it uses attention, which is a way to go back to earlier balls and grab those sticky notes, and it copies, Watson. I have a character sheet for Watson, right? There's like a little VLOOKUP table that it has encoded in its neural network weights that says, here's all the information I know about Michael Watson based off of my training data. And one of those things happens to be an attribute. It's like Watson.field is finance. So it's already memorized that. It just copies that note over and then uses it to, because remember, the of token is a specific point on the watermelon. So it's over here, right? But like finance is over here. It's this other point. It uses that to boost exactly this much to jetpack itself over here. And then when you unembed, the model goes finance. So that's how it works, right? That's how a language model works. And that's a specific mechanism. It's like some knowledge retrieval fact lookup, right? That we now, in a limited capacity, understand better. Before it was a total black box. I didn't know how that works. There's other examples, right? There's like, you had a podcast with Brian Mulstead on recently, right? So Brian and Michael were on a podcast. Michael turns to
Brian.
Yeah, you know that instantly, right? How did you do that? How did your brain do that? I don't know. Some neurons fired, right? And it knew that the next thing was Brian. How does the model do that? Well, it's really weird. There's like 26 attention heads. It's called the indirect object identification task. And there's really weird stuff like typically models like to copy stuff. They like to copy this token to this token. So if you have a bad model, it'll actually say Michael turned to Michael, which is incorrect, right? But after training on all this data, it forms a little circuit that goes, I need to suppress those copying heads, those attention heads. Most of them are copying the token Michael. I need to like downweight those so it's not Michael. And I need to go and find the other name, Brian. And the way it does that is it reaches back to the token and, that ball for and it moves over Michael to here and Brian to here, and it fetches, Brian. I need to think to the right of and, not to the left of and. Really weird. It's like, but it's like an algorithm. It's like a Python program I could code out. It's like, just go back to the previous and look one token ahead of it. That's Brian. Copy that. Michael turned to Brian. It's mechanistic. I understand it, right? It's like just dominoes, right? Like I know exactly how the information moved from point A to point B to produce the word Brian. So it's like understandable and it's like unpackable to a human. So it's a trackable exercise. And the question that becomes, can you do that for everything? Can you do that to understand as a model builds these representations, right? What is it thinking about? What concept is it representing? In what order, in what sequence, in order to compute the next word that comes out when I apply it to my business problem, when I try to solve instrument master as a service, right? How does it know to do those things? And I mean, there it's like kind of interesting. It'll be kind of cool, but like it's not like super important. But if it's like in the context of run my company for me autonomously on my behalf forever and never, have to worry about it again, just put money in my bank account. Like then it becomes really important because I want to make sure that the stuff that it's doing, the how and the why, is like tied to my goals. Not like, I'll make a bunch of money and then in the end, I'll like lock Michael out of his two-factor off because I have all the keys. And then now I'm just like running off with it, right? Like, what are you going to do? Like, be like, I'm going to take the AI to court? Like, good luck with that. So, it's important to like be able to scale this, right? And I think it's an engineering problem. And I think the other thing about this is that like fundamentally, this is about the science of deep learning, right? It's about the science of understanding these black boxes. And it's crazy because it's like, you can actually do it. You can understand how these things speak English, how they model concepts, how they acquire knowledge, how they use that to solve tasks. And I think one way to make it maybe even more relatable is like we're all coming from finance, right? So like let's say I have an Excel workbook, right? And let's say that I want to do the same thing as a language model. I want to be able to generate completions and produce outputs that are relevant to the business. Somebody actually did this. They converted GPT-2 into an Excel workbook and it works. So you can actually implement a language model in Excel. And here's how it works, right? You have your summary sheet, just like you have like your financial report that you're trying to automate. And the very first summary is a bunch of words, right? It's like the prompt. So like every cell, A1 is like Michael, A2 is Watson, A3 is in the field of, right? How do we get to finance? And then the subsequent sheets are essentially, the first sheet is a fundamental model, just like an analyst builds a model for the income statement on a company they're covering. It's a fundamental model. The output of that model is a little column at the end. That's the probability assessment for every next possible word. And there's some Excel keywords that string that whole thing together and say, okay, Michael, the next word is, and you know what the model comes up with? Jordan. Because it's the most likely thing to follow Michael, right? It's a bigram. It's like the most likely token because Michael Jordan is possibly the most famous Michael. So then you go to Michael Watson and the model comes up with is, but it's doing that Excel calculation of like modeling out through computations, through Excel formulas. It's just arithmetic because like tensor multiplications and this fancy GPU stuff, it's just addition at the end of the day. And it comes up with the probabilities. The next word is 97% chance of being is. So you sample that, you go to the next word and you generate again. And so by the time you get to of, it's implementing that algorithm I discussed where there's like a subsheet. There's like a part of the sheet where it has like this VLOOKUP table that's like, what do I know about Michael Watson? I memorized this stuff. It like copy pastes that from the training process. During training, it built that little VLOOKUP table on like cell 22,000, right? And it's VLOOKUPing up, oh, I need to look at the field of Michael Watson. So grab that. Okay, it's finance. And that's what it uses in this formula to actually boost finance and says 97% chance it's finance. Keeps going. Mm-hmm. So it's an Excel model. And what attention does, right, just to kind of like wrap up this point, explaining like that language models are interpretable things. Before we had attention is all you need, that 2017 paper that kicked off the language model revolution, we didn't realize, oh, like as I have these Excel models on each word and I need to figure out what's the likelihood of the next word, it would be really nice if like I didn't have to build a new model from scratch. Like if you're an analyst, you want to know your previous quarterly model, right? From Q4, you want to use Q3, Q2, Q1, et cetera. You don't want to go back and rebuild the whole thing. You want to be able to reach back and grab that stuff, right? You want to be able to reference your previous worksheets. So that's all that attention is. Attention is basically the ability to do cross-reference, cross-sheet linking. So you're not just building a new model from scratch, but you can use the results from earlier in the earlier sheets, right? If this is like summary, word 1, word 2, word 3, you can reach back to earlier models to inform your future outputs. So that's a powerful thing. It's basically cross-sheet linking is what attention is.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find fascinating about attention and model interpretability is how much do you rely on the model versus having the model produce for you intermediate outputs that then you build processes on top of. So an example could be if I want to run a risk model on companies, I need to know, or on stocks, I need to know for each one of these stocks, is it a large cap? Is it a small cap? Is it a what sector it's in, so that I can create a risk model by looking at historical price volatility on given days, and I can create a factor for large cap or for a sector. And I could then go to the model and say, hey, I don't know if Apple's large cap or small cap, but if I have a very well-trained model with diverse information about Apple and whether or not it was a small cap or a large cap, but maybe I trained the model on that information, I could rely on attention to determine Apple is, or Apple large cap is, and then have the model just classify it as it's large cap.
Sure.
Or I could go to the model and I could say, Apple is in GICS sector technology, technology hardware. Or I might say, like, hey, I actually don't want to go to the model for that. I just want to use the model to be able to create that data platform for you. And you use the model to potentially help fill in the gaps that aren't deterministic. So then when I go to ask that question, I'm not actually going to the model itself. I am just going to a data platform that has been produced with the help of that model. But the better you can control the outputs of that model, the less need of being able to produce these intermediate.
Makes sense.
intermediate steps. Like you could then just assume that the model is very well trained. It has, for a question like the model is, or like Apple is a large cap stock, you put a very low temperature on the model within fine tuning. So there's not a lot of variability that it can produce. And you start leaning more and more on the model without having to create these intermediate data representations.
Well, what's interesting is like what you're talking about is improving. You're talking about, you're giving the model a prompt of some information you need to extract, right? It's in the model's head. It's in its weights, right? Because it got fed through the training process. They know that Apple is a large cap, but we can do this today. So like we can do this without emitting tokens and words and doing the really expensive thing of like doing inference. We can just read out directly what did the model think about that question. In the context of Michael Watson is in the field of finance, part of that paper was they actually did this. They basically stopped the model's rest of its forward pass running all the way to the end, and they just cherry picked out the specific thing, finance, because they knew what direction is finance on the watermelon. And they were able to read by the second token that the model knew that Michael is in the field of finance. So to your point, if you put in the company Apple, by the time you put in 3 tokens, the model has already loaded up all of its knowledge about Apple for the most part. And you can just read that off. If you have good interpretability, you just read it off directly. You don't have to generate like you have to spend dollars generating the completion of like, please tell me like what is the cap of Apple, and then like wait for the model to answer in English. You can just use interpretability to read its mind. Anyway, just a little tidbit on that. And the other thing is like, can I connect things back? Please. What I was saying before, because like I kind of posed this problem, right? I was like, you're solving a really important question. Like you're building a solution using technology for finance, right? Is probably going to become one of the most successful companies on Wall Street, right? I believe that. I believe in you. I believe in your execution. I believe in your vision. And I think you're going to crush it in that regard. And I kind of took that, right? And I also like superimposed these other things happening in the background with like geopolitics and like AI risk and what's the government doing. I think they're connected, right? I think that like you're going to keep executing and you're going to win and you're going to show what winning actually looks like. But in the same sense, you're also going to hit these interesting challenges and pain points that are coming at you as you're like deploying AI in the real world. And you will feel the pain a little bit, right? Like you'll have to deal with as you use GPT-5 or 6 and it's like 2027, like just do the thing I want. Like don't go off the rails here, right? Like just do the goal. And because we don't have a model for the model right now, because we are essentially deploying risk on an unmodeled name, to use a finance analogy here, we don't have a way to hedge that and get good, robust, reliable outcomes as we keep scaling the lever, right? As we increase the leverage of human to AI. I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to say, let's not deploy risk on unmodeled names. Let's model them, come up with a thesis of like what the model knows, understands, what it's good at, and then use that highly strategically, tactically in order to solve the problem, right? And if I don't do that, like imagine this for a second. Like imagine you become super successful, like more wildly than you ever imagined, right? And it's like this thing is working. And let's say it's like $1 billion, $10 billion, $100 billion, $1 trillion opportunity, right? Then that's a lot of value. It's a lot of money, right? So you're deploying that into the real world as an investment, right? Through a C corporation, right? By executing on a plan. And the thing is, if you were to do that as an instrument, as a position, like I'm going to take this $1 trillion position, and you don't have a model for your position, let's say you go to like Steve Cohen, or you go to like Ray Dalio, or you go to Ken, and you say like, I'm going to deploy this risk on an unmodeled name. It's a $1 trillion position. Am I good? No. It would get slapped out of your hands so fast, right? It's like, why are you deploying $1 trillion of risk on an unmodeled name? And there's a lot of really capable organizations and people solving the problem, right? Working on this. And so it's a matter of plugging into that. And it's a matter of combining, striking that balance, right? Of using the fruits of the AI labor of like what's coming out and the capabilities that are getting better. And then thinking through like, how do I manage the risks of this as I'm deploying it into my business? And how do I get a really good outcome using that? And so like what I want to close with is I want to kind of like basically recap and say like there's all these risks that aren't currently being hedged. I think Hedgineer and you and us and so on, like we could take some small part in like hedging that and hedging near term futures effectively, right? Like we can help with that. We're not powerless. And so the ask there is like, I have skin in this game. Like every cent I have is going into interpretability. Like I believe in it. I think this is the way. This is the how and the why of AI. It goes way beyond the what of AI, right? and I believe in it, right? So I'm asking you to believe in it, but I'm asking you like, I don't know, take a basis point, take like 1 point, take something, right? Like assess the value, put it into an Excel workbook and be like, what is the value of having basically infinite future returns worth to me today, right? Is it worth like some fraction of the passive income that I would make from a liquidity event? Maybe, maybe not, hopefully. Like Rob believes in it. You believe in Rob, right? Like Rob's telling you this is important. Like, so I don't know. But my point is just like, think about that. And I want to partner with you, right? Like this is an important problem. And like, I think you're going to crush it. And I think a lot of like Hedgineer podcast listeners also believe that what you're doing is highly important, right? That it's highly valuable to them, to the world, right? And that these problems are also important. Maybe now they're hearing about it for the first time, or maybe like, wow, I thought about that, but like, I didn't realize people are talking about that. Like, I didn't realize it's like that hot right now. So yeah, then I don't know, maybe email like Michael@hedgineer.io. If you're like a brilliant engineer who wants to work on solving technology for finance, go email Michael@hedgineer.io, right? Or if you want to be empowered as a researcher who's thinking about the AI risk stuff, right? Go email Michael@hedgineer.io, right? To basically, now you have an opportunity there. I would say that, or give me an email, like Rob@hedgineer.io. Like, I don't want to flood your inbox, right? Just like email Rob@hedgineer.io, right? Whatever. And I'll triage that for you. But like, my point is just like, if you set up the structure effectively, that's powerful because it's like addressing a real, tangible, valuable goal that people aren't addressing. It's not getting hedged. Like, no one's looking at it. You know, there are some people looking at it, but like, it's under-resourced relative to the value. And someone should just look at it. And I think you will build some incredible like Streamlit apps and some incredible like full stack products and then some incredible ways to turn the entire question of how do I model the universe, right? Of names, not like universe abstractly, but like how do I model my universe and then convert that into wins systematically, robustly, consistently using AI.
Yeah. Rob, that was awesome. And we're going to have to wrap up now, but I actually can't wait until you're on for another episode and then another episode after that. Awesome stuff. You're a great thought leader in the space, and I'm so excited to be partnering with you here at Hedgineer. And you touched on a really important point at the end. We are hiring actively at Hedgineer for AI engineers, software developers, people that are passionate about using technology skills within the hedge fund and investment industry. We're really trying to move the needle when it comes to what best-in-class technology systems look like within the hedge fund industry. So if you think that that's you, reach out to me at Michael@hedgineer.io or Rob@hedgineer.io. Join us on Slack. You can find us at hedgineer.io on the webpage, or follow us on any of the socials, or just ping me on LinkedIn. In addition to that, if you are an asset manager, a hedge fund that is really looking to have world-class technology, data platforms, and AI as part of your business, we would love to talk to you. We have a team of people, around 12 people so far, that are just incredibly passionate about building best-in-class technology, data, and AI systems that we partner with world-class hedge funds for deploying internally for their usage. And we're always looking for new customers and clients to partner with. So until the next episode, I'm your host, Michael Watson. This is the Hedgineer podcast, and we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you for joining. See you soon.
Hedgineer.